My father, Robert Reed, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table at his 60th birthday party, raised a glass of champagne, and publicly erased me from his life. To my son Ethan, he boomed, his voice echoing in the private dining room of the country club. A senior analyst at 28. He carries the Reed name with honor. He didn't even look at me. It was the deepest kind of betrayal, the one that doesn't just break your heart, but tries to convince you that you never deserved one in the first place. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the one person who was supposed to see you most clearly? I promised myself that night, in that cold, silent humiliation, that one day they wouldn't just see me, they'd have no choice but to look up. The private dining room at the Oak Valley Country Club was designed to make people like me feel small. The ceilings were impossibly high. The wood paneling was dark and gleaming, and the air smelled of old leather, expensive perfume, and the kind of quiet, confident money that never had to announce itself. I sat wedged between a distant aunt who kept asking if I was still single, and an uncle who only wanted to talk about the stock market. Across the table, my brother, Ethan, was glowing. He'd just announced his promotion to senior analyst at the investment firm where he'd worked since college. My father, Robert Reed, looked like his chest might burst with pride. He clapped Ethan on the back, his laugh unnecessarily loud, a performance for the room. My mother, Helen, sat beside him, her smile a fragile painted-on thing. She caught my eye for a second, a flicker of something, pity, apology, before looking away, back to her role as the supportive wife of a successful man. On the gift table, nestled amongst designer watchboxes and bottles of aged scotch, was my offering. It was a large, flat portfolio case. Inside was a custom-drafted architectural sketch, a preliminary design for the lakeside retirement home my parents always talked about. I had spent weeks on it, poring over every detail, from the sustainable wood sourcing to the way the morning light would hit the breakfast nook. It was a piece of my soul, rendered in graphite and ink, a demonstration of my dream. It remained unopened, a silent testament to my irrelevance. Then came the toasts. One after another, my father's colleagues and friends stood up to praise his career at Sterling Hale, the prestigious architecture firm where he was a senior project manager. They spoke of his integrity, his traditional values, his no-nonsense approach to building. He was a man of concrete and steel, they said, a man who built things that lasted. When my father finally stood, the room fell silent. He raised his crystal flute. He started with a joke about getting older. Then his eyes found Ethan. "But the greatest thing a man can build," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is a legacy, and I am so proud of the man my son has become." A senior analyst at 28, he carries the Reed name with honor. The applause was warm and genuine. My father beamed. That was when his old friend Mr. Davison, a jovial man with a red face, piped up. "That's wonderful, Robert. A fine boy. And what about Evelyn? What's she up to these days?" The question hung in the air, a spotlight swinging directly onto me. The table chatter died down. Every eye turned in my direction. I felt my face flush, a hot, prickling wave of shame. My father's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened, becoming a hard, thin line. "Evelyn is finding her way," he said, the words carefully chosen to sound supportive, but failing spectacularly. The subtext was a foghorn. She's a drifter, a disappointment, a failure. My brother Ethan, ever the helpful one, decided to clarify. He leaned forward, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. "She's still working on her little art projects." The phrase "little art projects" was a dagger. He made my passion, my entire field of study, sound like a child's macaroni necklace. A few people at the table chuckled, a polite, pitying sound that was worse than outright mockery. My mother just stared down at her plate, tracing the rim with her finger. Her silence was a form of consent. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and show them the portfolio, to explain the structural load calculations and the passive solar design, to prove that it wasn't a little art project. But my throat was tight, my body frozen in a cage of humiliation. I excused myself as soon as the dessert plates were cleared, mumbling something about an early morning. No one tried to stop me. As I was walking through the grand marble-floored lobby, A hand gripped my arm. It was my father. His face was thunderous. "What did you think you were doing?" he hissed, his voice low and furious. "Coming here, making everyone feel awkward." "I was invited," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's your birthday." "And you couldn't have put on a better face?" "When Mr. Davison asked about you, I was embarrassed, utterly embarrassed." He gestured vaguely with his free hand. "This fantasy of yours, this architect nonsense, it's a hobby, Evelyn, not a career. When are you going to stop embarrassing me and get a real job? You'll never amount to anything with these childish fantasies." He said it with such cold, brutal finality. Not in anger, but as a statement of fact. In his eyes, I was nothing. A useless, daydreaming child who was a stain on his reputation. The words hit me harder than a slap. I just stared at him, my heart feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I pulled my arm from his grasp, turned without another word, and walked out of the Oak Valley Country Club. I didn't look back. I left the unopened portfolio on the gift table. I left the girl who thought her father's love could be earned. I left my old self behind in that cold marble lobby, a ghost in a place I never belonged. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and tears, not loud, sobbing tears, but the quiet, hot kind that stream down your face when a wound is too deep for noise. My apartment, when I finally stumbled into it, felt like a physical manifestation of my failure. It was tiny, with peeling paint on the window frames and a persistent smell of damp from the bathroom. The rent took up more than half of my meager income from my part-time barista job. My drafting table, a second-hand purchase, dominated the small living space, covered in sketches and books that now felt like relics of a foolish delusion. I sank onto the lumpy sofa, the keys still clutched in my hand, and let the darkness of the room swallow me. For hours, I just sat there. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. My father's words echoed in the void, playing on a loop. Embarrassing, childish fantasies. You'll never amount to anything. Each word was a fresh cut. He hadn't just insulted me. He had passed a final judgment. In the world of Robert Reed, a world of promotions and stock portfolios and country club memberships, I was a zero, a nobody. The weight of his certainty was crushing. For a moment, I believed him. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a fool, chasing an impossible dream while my brother climbed the ladder of real-world success. The despair was a thick, suffocating blanket. I could feel myself sinking into it, giving up. But as the first pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the grimy window, something inside me shifted. The deep, aching hurt began to cool, and in its place, something else started to form. It was hard and cold and sharp. It was resolve. It was anger, yes, but a focused, crystalline anger. He had erased me from his life in that toast. He had called my dreams worthless. Fine. I would no longer try to exist in his world. I would build my own. They wanted me to get a real job. Okay, but I wouldn't be shuffling papers in some corporate office for the rest of my life. I wouldn't just join their game to earn a grudging nod of approval. I would change the entire board. I stood up, walked over to my laptop, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my tired face. I didn't look for barista jobs or administrative assistant positions. I started researching. I typed in keywords: architectural innovation, future of construction, disruptive building technologies. My father's firm, Sterling Hale, was old school. They built beautiful, expensive, traditional buildings. They scoffed at new ideas. And that was their weakness. I dug deeper, and I found it, a niche they would see as a joke. Sustainable, modular architecture, eco-friendly, prefabricated homes that were efficient, affordable, and had a low carbon footprint. It was the antithesis of everything my father stood for. It was perfect. For the rest of the day, fueled by a pot of bitter black coffee, I mapped out a plan. It wasn't a dream anymore, it was a battle strategy. Step 1. Certifications. I found an online course for LEED accreditation, leadership in energy and environmental design. It was the industry gold standard for green building. Step 2. Software. I needed to master the latest versions of Revit and AutoCAD, the professional-grade tools of the trade. Step 3. A business plan. I sketched out a 5-year projection for a small, agile company focused on custom sustainable design. The cost was the first major hurdle. The lead course alone was hundreds of dollars. The software licenses were thousands. I had $73 in my bank account. My eyes fell on the small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small sapphire, a gift from my grandmother before she passed away. It was the only truly valuable thing I owned. For a moment, I hesitated. It was a piece of her. But then I thought of my father's face, the dismissive wave of his hand. This wasn't just about passion anymore. This was about survival. I took the necklace to a pawn shop that afternoon. The man behind the counter gave me a fraction of what it was worth, but it was enough. It was seed money. As I walked out of that shop, the cash tucked into my pocket, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I had cut another tie to the past. The money wasn't for rent or for food. It was for ammunition. It was the first payment on the fortress I was going to build around myself. A fortress so strong and so successful that they would never be able to tear it down. They would have no choice but to look up at its walls. The next 6 months were a blur of exhaustion and caffeine. My life shrank to the size of 2 places: the soulless beige cubicle of my new data entry job, and the cramped corner of my apartment where my computer screen glowed late into the night. The data entry job was a mind-numbing exercise in mediocrity, typing endless strings of numbers into spreadsheets for 8 hours a day. It paid the bills, barely, and I hated every second of it. But it was a means to an end. The moment I clocked out, my real work began. I would race home, make a pot of coffee so strong it tasted like battery acid, and dive into my online courses. The technical manuals for LEED certification were dense, filled with engineering principles and environmental science that made my head spin. The software was even worse. Learning Revit was like learning a new language, one spoken in algorithms and complex command prompts. My second-hand laptop, which had been perfectly fine for browsing the internet and writing emails, groaned under the strain. It would overheat and shut down without warning, often taking an hour's worth of unsaved work with it. I learned to hit save every 30 seconds, a nervous tic born of repeated frustration. My social life didn't just evaporate, it was methodically executed. Friends would call, inviting me out for a drink or to a movie. I have to study, became my mantra. After a while, they stopped calling. I didn't blame them. I was a ghost, haunting my own life. My diet consisted of instant noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and the aforementioned bitter coffee. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes, permanent bruises from a lack of sleep. I was a machine fueled by desperation and a burning need to prove him wrong. The financial strain was a constant, heavy pressure. The software licenses were subscription-based, a monthly drain on my already pathetic bank account. I maxed out my first credit card buying a refurbished, more powerful computer. I maxed out a second one on advanced rendering plugins and digital textbooks. Debt collectors started calling, their polite but firm voices a constant reminder of how close to the edge I was. Every time the phone rang with an unknown number, my stomach would clench. There was a moment, about 4 months in, where I almost broke completely. My data entry job, a temp position, announced they were cutting my hours. Just like that, my income was slashed by a third. I did the math, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and there was no way to make it work. I was going to be short on rent. The crushing weight of my father's prediction, "You'll never amount to anything," came rushing back. The temptation to give up was overwhelming. I could quit the courses, sell the new computer, and get a second soul-crushing job. I could apply to be a secretary at a firm like my father's. A real job that would get him off my back. For a few hours, I seriously considered it. I was so tired, so bone-achingly tired of fighting. But then, as I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor, I saw the scene at the country club. I saw the pitying looks. I saw my brother's smug smirk. I saw my mother's averted eyes. And I saw my father's face, contorted with disgust as he called my dreams childish fantasies. That memory was a splash of ice water. It wasn't just fuel anymore. It was my entire engine. Failure was not an option, because failure meant proving them right. That night, I didn't sleep. I updated my profile on a freelance website, advertising my skills in graphic design, something I was good at, but hadn't pursued seriously. I took on any project I could get, no matter how small or how low the pay. I designed logos for pet grooming businesses, flyers for local bake sales, and social media banners for aspiring influencers. I worked on them during my lunch breaks, on the bus, and in the hours between my data entry job and my architectural studies. I started sleeping in 4-hour shifts, sometimes just 3. It was a brutal, isolating, soul-sapping grind. But with every freelance payment that hit my account, with every exam I aced, with every complex 3D model I successfully rendered, I felt a single brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. It was slow, painstaking work, but for the first time it felt real. It was mine. To really test my growing skills, I knew I needed feedback from people who weren't paid to teach me. I needed to see if my designs could stand on their own in the wild. So I started posting some of my conceptual work on an obscure online forum for architects and designers. It was a niche community, filled with professionals, students, and old-timers. I designed a small, eco-friendly cabin, complete with material specifications and energy efficiency calculations, and posted the renderings. I was proud of it. I thought it was clever and innovative. The first few comments were dismissive. "Cute but impractical," one user wrote. "The cantilever on the deck would never pass inspection," said another. My heart sank. Maybe my father was right. Maybe this was just a hobby. I was about to log off, defeated, when a new comment appeared. It was from a user with the handle, Archvance. And it was brutal. He didn't just criticize my design, he systematically dismantled it with the precision of a surgeon. "The thermal bridging at the window joints will negate 30% of your insulation's R value," he wrote. "Your choice of reclaimed timber is aesthetically pleasing, but structurally unsound for the climate you've indicated. And your greywater recycling system is a fantasy. It violates 3 separate building codes." He listed a half-dozen other flaws, each one more specific and devastating than the last. He tore my work to shreds. My first reaction was a hot flush of anger and defensiveness. Who was this guy to be so arrogant? But as I read his critique again, and then a third time, I realized something. He wasn't just being mean. He was right. These were flaws my online courses had never mentioned. Practical, real-world problems that only an experienced professional would see. His criticism, as harsh as it was brilliant. Curiosity replaced my anger. I clicked on his profile. It was sparse, but a quick search of the username Archvance, combined with a few keywords from his posts, led me down a rabbit hole. I found a series of old articles from architectural magazines from the late 90s. The name was Arthur Vance. He had been a rising star, a visionary architect praised for his radical ideas about sustainable, community-focused design. But then, the articles stopped. I found a final scathing piece that labeled him unprofitable and idealistic, detailing a massive project that had failed spectacularly, bankrupting his firm and getting him professionally blacklisted. He had tried to change the world, and the world had broken him for it. He had disappeared from the public eye completely. Taking a deep breath, I found an old, likely defunct email address for his former firm and sent a message into the void. I didn't make excuses for my flawed design. I thanked him for his honest, ruthless feedback. I told him it was the most valuable lesson I had learned in months. I explained that I was teaching myself and asked humbly if he would be willing to offer any further guidance. I didn't expect a reply. 3 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was simply A. Vance. The body of the message contained a single stark line: "Talent without discipline is worthless. Don't waste my time." It wasn't an invitation, it was a challenge. A door cracked open just enough for me to have to fight my way through. I spent the next 48 hours, sleepless again, completely redesigning the cabin from the ground up. I researched thermal bridging, sourced a new type of engineered sustainable wood, and redesigned the water system to be fully compliant with building codes. I incorporated every single one of his criticisms, not just fixing the problems, but showing that I understood why they were problems. I sent him the revised design with a simple subject line, Revision 2. This time, he replied in less than an hour. He agreed to a video call. The man who appeared on my screen looked older than his pictures, his face etched with the lines of disappointment, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm not your friend," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I don't do this out of the goodness of my heart. I failed. I was 20 years too early. I had the vision, but I couldn't make the money. Men listen. They called my ideas unprofitable daydreams." He leaned closer to his camera, his gaze intense. "You have a spark of that same vision, but you also seem to have a desperation I recognize. I will teach you. I will give you the knowledge they don't put in textbooks, but in return, you will be my proof of concept. Your success will be my vindication. You will build what I never could. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I understand." "Good," he grunted. "Now pull up your design. Your roof pitch is still all wrong. Let's get to work." Working with Arthur Vance was like being in a crucible. He was unforgiving, demanding, and had no patience for excuses. He would dissect my work, forcing me to defend every line, every material choice, every calculation. "Why that joint? Justify it. That's not good enough. Do it again." He pushed me past my limits, then pushed me further. Under his relentless, shadowy mentorship, my skills didn't just sharpen, they were forged into something new. I learned more in 3 months of our weekly video calls than I had in the entire previous year. One day, he sent me a cryptic email. "Contact this number. Say I sent you. Don't be an idiot." The number belonged to a man who needed a small, custom backyard office built. He was a friend of Arthur's, a lawyer who worked from home and was tired of using his dining room table. It was a tiny project, barely a room, but it was real. It was a chance to build something, not just design it. The first thing I did was form a limited liability company, an LLC. I couldn't use my own name. The Reed name was my father's, and I wanted no connection to it. I chose Aura Homes, using my middle name Aura, a name my mother had picked that my father had always disliked. It felt right, a secret identity for my new life. The project was a trial by fire. The real world was infinitely messier than a computer model. The first hurdle was navigating the labyrinth of city permits. The paperwork was endless, the bureaucracy a nightmare. Then came the contractors. I hired a small local crew, but they were used to traditional builds and questioned my sustainable material choices at every turn. "This reclaimed bamboo flooring? It's gonna warp," the foreman would grumble. I had to stand my ground, armed with Arthur's technical data and my own research, convincing them to trust the process. The worst moment came when a shipment of custom-milled, sustainable cedar siding arrived. It was beautiful, but a third of it was warped from improper storage during transit. The supplier refused to take responsibility. The project was already on a tight budget, and this mistake was going to put me deep in the red. I spent an entire night on the phone arguing with the supplier, my voice shaking with frustration. In the end, they offered a tiny discount, but I had to cover the rest of the cost to reorder the material myself. It was every dollar I had left. I was on site every single day, before my data entry job in the morning, and long into the evening after I clocked out. I learned to read a site plan, to troubleshoot a faulty electrical connection, to spot a poorly installed window seal. The client, the lawyer, was demanding. He would call at all hours, questioning the timeline, the colors, the placement of an outlet. It was stressful and exhausting. At one point, we were a week behind schedule and hundreds of dollars over budget, my budget. I felt like a complete failure. But I refused to quit. I remembered Arthur's words, "Your success is my vindication." I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let myself down. I pushed the contractors. I worked with the client, and I got it done. The final product was a small but beautiful space. The cedar siding smelled wonderful, The bamboo floors gleamed, and the clever placement of windows made the tiny office feel open and bright. It was functional, beautiful, and so sustainable it was practically carbon neutral. When the lawyer saw it for the first time, his jaw dropped. He walked through it, running his hand over the smooth wood, looking out the large picture window at his garden. "It's perfect," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "It's better than I ever imagined." He paid the final invoice without question, and a week later posted a long glowing review online, complete with pictures. I had done it. I had my first completed project, my first portfolio piece, my first piece of tangible proof that my childish fantasies could become brick and mortar. It was a small, quiet victory in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it felt monumental. It was the first stone in my new fortress. The glowing review from the lawyer was like a spark in a dry field. It didn't start a forest fire, but it did generate a lead. A local developer, a man named Stan, contacted me. He had seen the review and was intrigued by the sustainable angle. He was building a small duplex in a trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood and was looking for something to make it stand out. He wanted to meet. The potential money was life-changing. It was more than I made in a year at my data entry job. It was enough to pay off my credit cards, quit the job I hated, and focus on Aura Homes full-time. This was it. This was the break I had been working for. I spent a week preparing for the meeting, creating a full presentation with renderings, cost analyses, and a detailed breakdown of the environmental benefits. I met Stan at a coffee shop. He was a slick guy in his 50s, with an expensive watch and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed impressed by my presentation. He loved the designs and the marketing angle. "This green stuff is hot right now," he said, steepling his fingers. "I like it. We have a deal." My heart soared. I was about to thank him when he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Just one little thing," he said, that slick smile returning. "The proposal specifies this high-grade, eco-friendly insulation. Great stuff, I'm sure, but my supplier can get me a standard fiberglass insulation for a fraction of the cost. And the paperwork for the environmental certification, let's just say we can be creative. No one will know the difference." He winked. "It'll save us 50 grand. We'll split the difference. 25 for you, 25 for me, easy money." I just stared at him. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. $50,000. That was a number so large it felt like a fantasy. It would solve every single one of my problems. I could buy better equipment, rent a small office, hire a part-time assistant. I could finally breathe. The temptation was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I thought about how easy it would be. Just one little lie, one corner cut. My father's firm, Sterling Hale, was famous for its prestige, but I'd also heard the whispers over the years, the rumors of them prioritizing budgets over vision, of making practical compromises to please wealthy clients. They built beautiful things, but were they built with integrity? I excused myself to the restroom, my hands shaking. I pulled out my phone and called Arthur. I quickly explained the situation, my voice trembling. I think I was hoping he'd give me an easy answer, a loophole. He was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim and heavy with the weight of his own past. "This is it, Evelyn," he said softly. "This is the choice. The one they give you when they think you're hungry enough to bite. It's the corner you cut that defines the shape of your entire career. You can take the money and be just like them, another builder who talks a good game. Or you can walk away and keep the only thing you truly own, your principles." He paused. "I took the deal once, a long time ago. A small compromise. I've regretted it every day since." He hung up. I stood there in the cold, sterile bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the desperation, but I also saw a flicker of something else. Strength. I walked back to the table. Stan was looking at his phone, impatient. "So we good?" he asked without looking up. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "We're not. The design is the design. The materials are the materials. I don't compromise on that." He finally looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, then annoyance. Are you kidding me? It's a no-brainer. My answer is no, I repeated, gathering my things. I walked away from the table, away from the $50,000, my stomach twisted in a tight, painful knot. I had just turned down my big break. I felt like an idiot. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was a new number. My heart sank, assuming it was another bill collector. I almost didn't answer, but I did. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Is this Evelyn with Aura Homes? She asked. My friend, the lawyer you built that office for. He referred me. He told me you were the most principled designer he'd ever met. It turned out she was a wealthy philanthropist who wanted to build a guest house on her estate. She had heard the story without knowing the details of me walking away from a lucrative but unethical deal. That was what sold her. She wasn't just impressed by my designs, she was impressed by my integrity. The new project was twice as big as the duplex, with a budget that made Stan's offer look like pocket change. And this time there would be no compromises. Word of Aura Homes began to spread through a very small, very specific grapevine. My name wasn't known, but my company's was. And somehow that grapevine reached my brother, Ethan. He must have heard it from a friend of a friend. He was a financial analyst. He knew how to dig. It didn't take him long to find the Aura Homes website. I can just imagine him seeing it. Him in his corner office, scrolling through the pictures of the lawyer's backyard studio. To him, it must have looked pathetic. A tiny little shed. He probably laughed. My little art projects had become a little building business. In his world of multi-million-dollar mergers, it was a joke, a pathetic little side hustle that was destined to fail. And in his mind, he probably decided he needed to help me see that reality. For my own good, of course. The attack was quiet and anonymous. It started with a single one-star review on a popular contractor finder website. Avoid at all costs. It screamed in all caps. The review was professionally written, full of industry jargon that sounded convincing. It claimed shoddy workmanship, citing imaginary leaks. It accused me of missing deadlines that had never existed. It called my claims about sustainability fraudulent greenwashing. It was signed a disappointed client. I had only had one client. I called the lawyer immediately, my heart pounding. He was horrified. Evelyn, that's absurd. I've been telling everyone how amazing you are. He immediately posted his own 5-star review, trying to counteract it, but the damage was already being done. Over the next few days, 3 more 1-star reviews appeared on different platforms. They all had the same tone, the same slick, corporate-sounding complaints. One claimed I'd left a worksite a mess. Another accused me of hiding costs. It was a coordinated smear campaign. My business phone, which had started ringing with a few inquiries after the philanthropist hired me, went silent. A promising lead for another small project, a woman who had seemed enthusiastic, sent me a curt email. I've seen your reviews online. I'll be going in a different direction. Thank you. I felt that same cold, sickening dread I'd felt at my father's birthday party. They were trying to crush me. Not with a public toast this time, but with anonymous digital poison. They wanted to stamp out this little spark of success before it could ever catch fire. I fell apart. For a whole day, I just sat on my sofa, unable to work, unable to think. All that sacrifice, all those sleepless nights, and my own brother was tearing it down with a few keystrokes. It felt so personal, so cruel. I almost broke. I almost called him, to scream, to cry, to ask him why. But then I thought of Arthur. I called him, my voice cracking as I told him what was happening. I expected sympathy. I got cold, practical advice. Stop crying, he said, his voice sharp. Emotion is a luxury you can't afford. This is an attack. You don't get emotional with an attacker, you get evidence, you fight back with facts. His words cut through my panic. He was right. Crying wouldn't fix this. I spent the next 2 days not as a victim, but as a detective. I meticulously documented everything. I took screenshots of the fake reviews, noting the dates and times they were posted, all within a 48-hour window. I noted the eerily similar phrasing, the use of business buzzwords that a normal homeowner wouldn't use. Then, I crafted my response. I didn't get into a flame war. On each platform, I posted a calm, factual rebuttal. Aura Homes has only completed one project to date, I wrote. Our client, Mr. Lawyer's name, has graciously allowed me to share his contact information for a reference. Here are photos of the completed project. Here is a copy of the final, signed-off inspection report. We believe these anonymous reviews are a malicious and coordinated attack. I laid out the evidence clearly and professionally. I didn't accuse anyone. I just presented the truth. My transparency had an unexpected effect. An influential design blogger, one who focused on small businesses and ethical practices, saw the exchange. She was intrigued by the story of a new woman-owned business being targeted by such a sophisticated smear campaign. She contacted me. I told her everything, leaving my family out of it. I framed it as a story of digital, David versus Goliath. She wrote a piece about it. The article, titled How a Vicious Smear Campaign Backfired on an Up-and-Coming Green Builder, went viral in niche design and small business circles. It painted Aura Homes not as a failure, but as a resilient, ethical, and transparent company that had stood up to anonymous bullies. My inbox, which had been silent for a week, suddenly exploded with messages of support. And among them, there were new, serious business inquiries. Ethan's attempt to destroy me had just given me my biggest platform yet. The blog post about the smear campaign did more than just bring me a few new clients. It put the name Aura Homes on a radar I never could have imagined. A few weeks after the article went viral, I received an email from a low-level analyst at a company called Apex Conglomerate. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The email was brief and corporate, requesting a preliminary phone call to discuss a potential strategic partnership. I assumed it was probably a sales pitch for some new building material. I almost ignored it, but on a whim I agreed to the call. That first call led to a second, this time with a vice president. The questions they asked were sharp, specific, and focused on my business model, my supply chain, and my vision for sustainable building. They weren't trying to sell me anything. They were vetting me. After the second call, I finally Googled Apex Conglomerate. My heart nearly stopped. Apex was a massive, multinational corporation with holdings in tech, logistics, and real estate. And one of the oldest and most prestigious companies in their real estate portfolio was a firm called Sterling Hale. My father's firm. Apex was the parent company. They owned the place where my father had built his entire career, the place that was honoring him for his lifetime achievement. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The CEO of Apex Conglomerate was a man named Marcus Donovan. He was a legend in the business world, known for being a ruthless pragmatist who was always 10 steps ahead of the market. He wasn't sentimental, he didn't care about tradition, he cared about data, and the data was showing that the future of real estate wasn't in the massive, energy-guzzling buildings that Sterling Hale specialized in. The future was smaller, smarter, and greener. Sterling Hale, with my father as a prime example of its culture, was too old and too stubborn to pivot. They were a dinosaur. So Marcus Donovan had decided to do what he always did. Instead of trying to teach the dinosaur a new trick, he was going out to find a nimble, aggressive mammal to lead the charge. He was looking to acquire a small, innovative company and build a new division around it. My company. The next month was a whirlwind of due diligence and high-stakes negotiations. Apex's lawyers and accountants descended on my tiny one-woman operation. They wanted to see every receipt, every permit, every line of code in my business plan. It was terrifying. I was just a girl who had been living on instant noodles a year ago, and now I was negotiating with a corporate giant. I called Arthur. "I'm in over my head," I told him, my voice shaking. "No, you're not," he said calmly. "You're an expert in your field. They need you more than you need them. They have money, but you have the vision. Don't ever forget that." He agreed to act as my advisor, sitting in on the video conferences, a silent, formidable presence. He helped me understand the legal jargon and coached me on how to negotiate. "Don't ask for what you think you're worth," he told me. "Demand what the vision is worth." In the end, Apex didn't just acquire Aura Homes, they made it the foundational core of their brand new global division, Apex Sustainable Living. And they didn't offer me a mid-level management job. They offered me the directorship of the entire division. The contract they put in front of me was staggering. It was a multi-million-dollar deal, with a salary, stock options, and a budget that made my head spin. It also came with an ironclad multi-year non-disclosure agreement. No one could know about the deal until Apex made the official announcement, which was scheduled for a year later, after I had time to build out my team and strategy. I signed the papers in a sterile downtown boardroom, with Arthur standing silently behind me. As my pen flowed across the page, I felt a profound sense of dislocation, to the world, and especially to my family. I was still just Evelyn Reed, the struggling artsy drifter with a little design company, the girl who would never amount to anything. But in the silent, secret world of corporate contracts and NDAs, I was now a high-level executive. I was a director. I was my father's boss, several times removed, and he had absolutely no idea. A year passed in what felt like a secret double life. By day, I was still living in my small apartment, driving my beat-up car. I kept up the pretense of running a small, struggling freelance business. But my real life happened in secret. I was flying back and forth to the Apex headquarters in Chicago, meeting with engineers, supply chain experts, and marketing teams. I was building my division from the ground up, hiring the brightest young minds in sustainable architecture, many of whom had been rejected by traditional firms like Sterling Hale. I was no longer just a designer. I was a leader, a strategist, an executive. The hesitant, humiliated girl from the country club was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth because she had built it herself, from nothing. Then, one Tuesday morning, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "You're invited, a gala to celebrate Robert Reed." My finger hovered over the delete button. It was a formal, digitally engraved invitation to a black tie event at the Oak Valley Country Club, the exact same place my public execution had occurred. The gala was to honor my father with a Lifetime Achievement Award from Sterling Hale for his 30 years of service. My stomach clenched. The invitation noted that the keynote speech and presentation of the award would be delivered by a very special guest, Mr. Marcus Donovan, CEO of the parent company, Apex Conglomerate. My first, overwhelming instinct was to drag the email to the trash. Why would I ever voluntarily walk back into that room? Why would I subject myself to their pity, their condescension, their judgment? The wound was no longer fresh, but the scar was still there. I had built a new life for myself in secret, a world they couldn't touch. Going back felt like a betrayal of that new self. But I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I closed my laptop and walked over to the window, looking down at the street below. The invitation felt less like an invitation, and more like a summons, a final test. I picked up my phone and called Arthur. I didn't even say hello. "They're giving my father a Lifetime Achievement Award," I said flatly, "at the country club. Donovan is presenting it. They invited me." Arthur was quiet on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him drawing on a piece of paper, a habit he had when he was thinking. And, he finally asked. "I don't want to go," I confessed, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "What's the point? To sit at a back table and watch them celebrate him?" "Robert's award is for a lifetime spent building the past," Arthur said, his voice slow and deliberate. "He's being honored for perfecting a model that is already obsolete. You, Evelyn, are the architect of the future. The very man giving him that award is the same man who invested millions in you because he knows it. You are not going back there as the girl they mocked. You are not the struggling artist with childish fantasies. You are going as the director of Apex Sustainable Living. You are, for all intents and purposes, going as their boss. This isn't their event, it's yours. Go and claim your victory. Don't do it for them, do it for you." His words hung in the air, slicing through my fear and uncertainty. He was right. Hiding was a form of defeat. True victory wasn't about building my secret empire. It was about having the strength to stand in the light. A slow, cold resolve settled over me. I walked back to my computer, opened the email, and clicked the link. I typed my name, Evelyn Reed, into the box, and hit RSVP, attending. I was going back to the lion's den, but this time, I wasn't going as prey. I arrived at the Oak Valley Country Club alone. The valet, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, looked surprised when I pulled up in my practical 4-year-old sedan, parked between a new Porsche and a gleaming black Mercedes. I handed him the keys and walked up the stone steps, the familiar click of my heels on the marble floor, a stark reminder of the last time I was here. This time, however, I wasn't wearing an ill-fitting dress I'd bought on sale. I was wearing a simple, exquisitely tailored black dress by a designer whose name was whispered in tones of reverence. It had cost more than my first car, a silent armor for the battle ahead. I spotted them across the crowded ballroom, clustered near the bar. My father Robert holding court, looking proud and distinguished in his tuxedo. My brother Ethan standing beside him, a carbon copy of his father's arrogance, a smug smile fixed on his face, and my mother Helen, a flute of champagne in her hand, looking beautiful and anxious, her eyes constantly scanning the room. Her eyes found me first. Her smile faltered, a flicker of shock and confusion crossing her face. She nudged Ethan, who turned. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. He muttered something to my father. Finally, my father turned. He saw me, and his jovial expression hardened into a familiar mask of disapproval. As if drawn by a magnet, they began to move towards me. Ethan got to me first. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the quiet elegance of my dress. "Wow, Evelyn," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you win the lottery or something?" "Don't get too used to it." It was his standard move: diminish, devalue, dismiss. "It's good to see you too, Ethan," I said, my voice calm and even. The lack of a defensive reaction seemed to throw him off. My father arrived next, my mother trailing in his wake like a nervous ship. "Evelyn," my father said, his tone clipped, "I'm surprised to see you." "You invited me," I reminded him gently. "Yes, well," he huffed, clearly displeased by my presence. He glanced around the room, at his colleagues, at the important people mingling. "Try not to make a scene tonight. This is a very important evening for me." "I have no intention of making a scene," I promised, and I meant it. The scene was going to make itself. An event coordinator with a clipboard approached us. "The Reed party?" she asked. "We have your table ready." She started to lead us towards a large round table near the front. My father, of course, was at the center seat. My mother and Ethan had seats beside him. The coordinator paused, looking at her chart. "And, Evelyn Reed, we have you at table 24. Table 24 was in the far back corner of the massive room, near the kitchens. It was the social equivalent of Siberia. My father didn't flinch. Ethan smirked. This was the plan. Invite me, then stick me in a corner to remind me of my place. I gave the coordinator a polite, unwavering smile. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice perfectly level. "My seat is at the head table." She looked flustered. "Ma'am, the head table is reserved for Mr. Reed's family, and the speakers from Apex Conglomerate." "I know," I said. "There's still been a mistake." My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "Evelyn, for God's sake, don't be difficult, just go to your table." Before I could respond, a new voice cut in, smooth and authoritative. "Is there a problem here?" It was Mr. Marcus Donovan, the CEO himself. He had walked over from the head table, an amused and curious glint in his sharp eyes. My family froze. My father's demeanor shifted instantly from tyrant to sycophant. "Mr. Donovan, no problem at all," he stammered. "Just a small seating mix-up. This is my son Ethan and my wife Helen." He gestured to me dismissively. "And this is my daughter, Evelyn." Mr. Donovan looked at me. Our eyes met. For a split second, a universe of understanding passed between us. He had seen the seating chart. He knew exactly what was happening. He gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of their private alliance. To my family, it looked like a simple, polite acknowledgement. Of course, Mr. Donovan said, his gaze sweeping over my family before landing back on the coordinator. There does seem to be a mistake. Ms. Reed's seat is next to mine. The silence was deafening. The coordinator's eyes went wide. My mother's hand flew to her necklace. Ethan looked like he'd been slapped. My father just stared, his mouth slightly open, utterly confused. "Come, Ms. Reed," Mr. Donovan said, offering me his arm. "We have a lot to discuss before the speeches." I took his arm, gave my stunned family a small, serene smile, and allowed the CEO of Apex Conglomerate to escort me to the head table, leaving them standing there in a state of complete and utter shock. The trap they had so carefully laid for me had just snapped shut, and they were the ones caught inside. Dinner was an exercise in controlled tension. From my seat at the head table, next to the powerful and inscrutable Marcus Donovan, I had a perfect view of my family. They were seated at a table just below the dais, close enough to be honored, close enough for me to watch them unravel. My father spent the entire meal shooting confused, angry glances in my direction. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. How did his failure of a daughter end up at the head table with his company's supreme commander? He kept trying to catch Mr. Donovan's eye, to somehow reassert his importance, but Donovan was a master of corporate politics. He engaged me in a lively, focused conversation about market trends and material sourcing, effectively creating a bubble around the two of us, making it clear to the entire room where his attention lay. Ethan was worse. He stared at me with open hostility, whispering furiously to my mother, who just picked at her food, her face pale and drawn. She looked terrified, like a woman watching two trains about to collide. Every time a colleague of my father's would stop by their table, they would glance up at me, sitting next to Donovan, a question in their eyes. The whispers started to ripple through the room. Who was that woman? What was a Reed doing up there? Finally, the dessert plates were cleared. A hush fell over the ballroom as Marcus Donovan was introduced and walked to the podium. A spotlight followed him, casting the rest of the room in a respectful gloom. He was a charismatic speaker, his voice calm and commanding. "Good evening," he began. "We are here tonight to celebrate a man who has dedicated 30 years to his craft. A man who represents the very foundations of a great company. Robert Reed." My father puffed out his chest, a proud, relieved smile finally returning to his face. This was it. This was the validation he lived for. He nodded graciously as a wave of applause washed over him. "Sterling Hale has a storied past," Donovan continued, his eyes sweeping the room, "a legacy built on tradition, strength, and an unwavering commitment to quality. Robert is a pillar of that tradition." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. My father was beaming, soaking in every syllable. "But," Donovan said, and the single word shifted the entire tone of the room. "The future of this industry, the future of Apex Conglomerate, is not in celebrating what we've done, it is in building what comes next." He began to speak about the future, about innovation, disruption, and sustainability. He painted a vivid picture of a world that was moving beyond the old ways of building. I could see the confusion creeping back onto my father's face. This wasn't the speech he was expecting. "To lead us into that future," Donovan announced, his voice ringing with energy, "Apex has invested heavily in a new vision, a new division, built from the ground up to revolutionize the way we live. We call it Apex Sustainable Living." He let the name sink in, then he smiled. "To build a new empire, you need an emperor, or in this case, an empress. We needed a leader with proven vision, with unmatched tenacity, and a talent for creating the future that is, frankly, quite rare. We searched for a long time, and we found that leader in the brilliant founder of a small but revolutionary company called Aura Homes." At the mention of Aura Homes, I saw Ethan flinch as if he'd been electrocuted. His face went white. He knew that name. My mother looked from Ethan to me, her expression a mask of dawning horror. My father just looked bewildered. He didn't recognize the name at all. Donovan looked directly at me, a real, genuine smile on his face. "It is my great personal and professional honor to introduce the director of our new global division, the architect of our future, Ms. Evelyn Reed. The spotlight swung away from Donovan and hit me, 1,000 watts of light pinning me in my chair. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Then, the applause started, led by the apex executives at the head table. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at my family. Ethan's jaw was literally hanging open. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother's face was ashen, her hand clutched to her chest as if to keep her heart from beating its way out. And my father. His proud smile had not just collapsed, it had been wiped from his face, leaving behind a slack gray mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He was frozen. He looked from me, to the spotlight, to the applauding crowd, and back to Donovan, his mind utterly failing to process the reality of what was happening. Then, Mr. Donovan delivered the final devastating blow. He looked directly at my father, his voice laced with just the right amount of feigned, polite curiosity, a voice that carried across the entire silent room. "Robert," he said, shaking his head in mock wonder. "I have to say, I'm a little surprised. You've been with Sterling Hale for 30 years. You're a legend here. Why on earth didn't you mention she's your daughter?" Every single eye in that ballroom swiveled from me to my father. He was trapped, pinned by the spotlight of 1,000 stares. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. He was speechless. The man who had so easily dismissed me, erased me, and labeled me a failure was now publicly revealed as not just a father, but a fool who had been completely blind to the value of his own child. In the back of the room, near the table I was supposed to have been banished to, I saw a figure rise. It was Arthur Vance, my guest. He wasn't applauding. He was just standing there, a small, proud, vindicated smile on his face, and he slowly, deliberately raised his glass to me. The wounded mentor, finally seeing his proof of concept shine. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. The applause died down, but the shockwave from Donovan's reveal continued to ripple through the room. People I didn't know came up to congratulate me, their eyes flickering towards my father with a mixture of curiosity and pity. He remained at his table, a hollowed-out man, staring blankly at his award, which now seemed more like a tombstone for his pride. Ethan tried to approach me once, near the end of the night. He looked disheveled, his usual smugness replaced by a desperate, fawning panic. "Evelyn, I had no idea," he stammered, his words tripping over themselves. "This is incredible. We should talk. I work in finance, you know. Maybe I could help our division." I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. I held his gaze until he couldn't take it anymore, his eyes darting away in shame. He turned and practically fled. The story was about moving forward, not about settling old scores with a man who only saw value when it was reflected in a multi-million-dollar contract. My mother sent a waiter over with a note scrawled on a napkin. "We need to talk, please, Mom." I folded it and put it in my purse, a relic from a past I was no longer a part of. A month later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It wasn't a palace, but it was mine. A minimalist, light-filled space in a new, sustainable building downtown, a building whose design principles I admired. The air was cool and clean. The city lights glittered below me like a fallen constellation. My phone buzzed on the small table beside me. It was a long, rambling text message from my mother, full of apologies, excuses, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. I read it, and then I put the phone down without replying. My victory was never about getting their apology. It wasn't about watching their world collapse, as satisfying as that single moment had been. It was about this quiet, this peace, the unshakable confidence that came not from a title or a salary, but from knowing I had faced the void and built something real in its place. On the drafting table inside, lit by a single warm lamp, were the blueprints for my division's first major project. A community of beautiful, affordable, eco-friendly homes for working-class families. It was a project Sterling Hale would have laughed at. It was a project that was going to change lives. I picked up my pen, a familiar weight in my hand, and made a small notation on the plans. tweaking the angle of a roofline to capture more of the morning sun. My father wanted me to get a real job. He just never, in his wildest dreams, imagined that I would be the one creating them. True success, I realized, wasn't about proving your enemies wrong. It was about building a world so complete, so fulfilling, and so entirely your own, that their opinions no longer mattered at all. They were just faint, irrelevant echoes from a life I had long since left behind. My story is proof that your value is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. True strength comes from building your own future, brick by brick, until your success is too big for anyone to ignore. What labels have you refused to accept? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Thanks for watching.